Learning about security doesn't need to be scary.
If you want to ship code securely with confidence, check out the URL below and challenge yourself with thousands of challenges in 29 coding frameworks. Let the games begin.
The next talk is DIY Azure Security Assessment. I've got two awesome ladies here, Teri and Tanya. And I'm not going to butcher the introduction because obviously they'll do a much better job. So I'm going to hand it over to them and let them continue. So welcome.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Teri.
And we're going to talk about how to do your own Azure security assessments. So let's talk about it. Okay, so first, what are we going to talk about today? How to do it yourself. I know that you can hire professionals. That is what we do, mostly her. But the point is that you should actually be able to do a lot of this work yourself because it'll be better for you. Oh, so I'm Tanya. You met me earlier. And I'm still Tanya, and I still work at Security Sidekick. So instead, let's talk about Teri.
So my name is Teri Radichel, and I just have a few things about me on the slide. I've done a lot of different things, but I have a GSE, so if you know what that is, they're kind of hard to get. I am an AWS hero, so don't tell anyone from there that I'm here talking about Azure. But I run the AWS meetup in Seattle. I love all the clouds. I just want you to be secure in whichever cloud you choose to use. And I run the AWS meetup in Seattle that has about 3,000 members. So somehow I got that award. And I'm on the former Capital One Cloud team. You'll probably hear more about that today. A little bit later if you go to the event later today. We're on a panel. And I have a company called Second Sight Lab. I do some training. I do security assessments, pen tests, and I help auditors. So I really focus on cloud security.
Cool. This one's you.
Okay, so what is the security assessment? So if you're a security person in the room, you might know this. Sometimes, people who haven't done this before, that what's the difference between an audit, an assessment, a pen test? So we wanted to talk about that for a minute. An assessment is really looking for gaps in your security and providing some sort of analysis of, how good is your security. And it may be broad and may look at a lot of different things. For example, talking to people, looking at architecture, looking at the settings in your account. There's a lot of things that it can be. And there's some of these things we're going to show you today that you can do yourself. After you're done, you usually write a report for the customer and tell them, hey, here's how you're doing. Here's some things you can fix. So what's a pen test? Pen test is different because in a pen test, you actually try to exploit the systems. Sometimes in an assessment, you will do some scans or look at something in a technical way, but you typically don't try to break in. And when you do a pen test, you actually try to break in. You try to show how something could be exploited, how you could pivot and get to other systems and steal data. So that's the difference there.
So why would you want to do this yourself? Why wouldn't you call Teri? There's so many things that you should do before you hire a pen tester. There's so many things that you could do. So let's say you don't have enough money to hire a pen tester, or you're not sure if you're ready. Going through all of these steps will help you mature your cloud security program, and that's why we wanted to share it. And then if you do all of these things, definitely call Teri, and then she will find more scary things, but you will be at such a higher level. She's a badass. Don't let her tell you otherwise. Okay, so first things first, do not test the Azure Fabric. That is what makes up Azure. That is the Microsoft part. They will be very upset, and they have more lawyers than anyone else ever, as far as I know. And it's just a bad idea. And also, you can tell them that you're coming. So they are the first cloud where they're like, we know you're going to do it, but just be nice if you tell us. So you don't have to tell them, but it means that we won't go. I used to work there until 3 weeks ago. So they won't go no, don't do that. So it's better to tell them you'll have better results. So what is out of scope for this talk? So we're going to talk about Azure Cloud Security and how you can do your own assessment, but what is not in scope? DevOps security, not in scope. Application security, not in scope. I know you're I'm at AppSec Day. A lot of apps live on the cloud, and if your cloud is wildly insecure, your day still is going to be bad. API security, password management, physical security, all those things are out of scope. We're only going to cover cloud security. Also, after this slide, there will be no more rickrolling. Does everyone know what rickrolling is? Okay, so 5% of the audience got my joke. It's good. Okay, so let's be serious and do this now. Okay, great.
Okay, so as Tanya said, we talked about what's in scope for this talk. When you do an assessment, you define the scope with your customer, what will and will not be assessed. I mean, you could go on for days and weeks doing everything, but you want to set up, what things do they care about? What are the parts of the cloud that you want to assess? And some of those things could be, you could be doing the different layers of application and data security, or they may want you to look at their processes, their architecture. A lot of times, you can look at individual components in the cloud and they could be, check the box, the right thing. But when you put it all together in architecture, you could still have problems. And so these are all the things you want to discuss with the client, or if you're doing it in-house with whoever you get permission from to do this, you want to say, okay, here's what we're going to assess. One thing to think about, too, is when you're talking about cloud systems, some people think, we're just going to test what's in the cloud. But there's a lot of things connected to the cloud which can affect your cloud security. All those systems that are connected to the cloud could potentially be exploited, and credentials on those systems could be used to get into your cloud. So you just want to think about, do we want to include things only in the cloud, or do we also want to include some of these external things like administrator systems and credentials, so on and so forth.
So this talk started because I convinced Teri to come do stuff with my open source project, OWASP DevSlop. And so we decided to do a security assessment of our things. So there's actually a video of us and then a bunch of blog posts about this, which we'll share at the end. And then we came up with this talk because of it. And so I have just dragged Teri all over the place. I'm just like, will you do this with me? Yeah, and she's been very accommodating. So thank you. She's like the honorary member of the DevSlop team. Okay, so what is our scope? So our website, my entire Azure subscription at the time. So every single thing, so all my demos, all my stuff. So I didn't have like official Microsoft stuff in my subscription. All of the real work things were tucked away, safe from us. So the database that went to that one, to that website, the network that I had, stuff Tanya should have deleted from her previous demos that she didn't. Yeah, guess what she found? VMs, containers. So I didn't have any containers at that point. But we did not actually test the web app itself. So we're not going to talk about that specifically, like the web app testing. We've done lots of other episodes about that, but we just wanted to talk about the cloud. So the number one thing that it told us, which it will tell you too, is that you should turn on multi-factor authentication for your owner subscriptions. Yes, those are the keys to your kingdom. They are every single thing ever. Who here has MFA on their personal accounts and work accounts that are important? I dream of the day where every hand goes up. I am totally obsessed with MFA. I troll my bank online because they don't offer MFA for their users. And they're like, what if you went with another bank? I'm like, no, I want you to give it to me. So I'm really, really obsessed with multi-factor authentication. That's the number one thing, and it turns out Microsoft agrees with me, and I hope you do too. Okay, so now let's talk about identity and access management, or IAM, in the cloud. So obviously in Azure, we use Azure Active Directory. Makes sense, right? So you can set up roles. Azure AD is the exact same as regular on-prem AD, except it's in Azure. Surprise! So in Azure, we have these things called policies. So back when I was a dev, I thought policies were words on a website written in legal language I didn't understand that sometimes people would yell at me about. But in Azure, that's not what they are. It's where you set up a bunch of rules that are true or false. So you're like, yes, all the owners need to have MFA installed. All the web apps have to be, HTTPS only. So you set up all of these rules, and then it actually auto scans every single thing all the time in your subscription. And then it's like, that person's breaking policy. Do you want to fix it, or do you want to yell? And so that's what I mean by policies. It'll help you implement least privilege. Who here knows what least privilege is? Only giving the amount of permission that you actually need to get your job done. So it turns out Tanya should not be DB owner all the time. What? So this is Teri's point. Yeah.
Service accounts, I think there's a new option now since we wrote these slides. But basically, you want to give your resources permissions as well. And there's a way to do that. Every cloud provider has this. In Azure, you can create a mechanism for your resources, such as virtual machines or functions, to do things in your account. And you want to limit those privileges for what those resources can do to what they actually need to do.
Exactly. So it's not Tanya's Azure account that is talking to the database, from the app to the database. What if I quit? because I joke, I did quit. But the point is if you have a service account talking between the two, then that means like if that service account starts talking to other things immediately, like it's very obvious it's bad. So it applies to everything in Azure. It works in multi-cloud environments, so it plays nice with the other clouds, and it works with Azure Stack, which is like where you want to have Azure, but you're also like, oh, but I don't trust the cloud. And then basically I made a video about how this works because I'm obsessive like that. So if you want, there's going to be a bunch of short links on lots of the different sides if you want to take pictures. And also, I believe they're recording this. Is that true? Someone nod yes? Okay, maybe. We'll see.
All right, so the other thing you want to think about when you set up your cloud accounts is how do you structure your accounts? So we've talked already about least privilege, and you can think about segregation. You have that person with the special keys. That person keys get stolen and they can do anything in the account. That's probably not good. So you want to think about setting up potentially different teams with different permissions, or something like that. That you probably have dev, QA, and prod with different permissions. And the way you can segregate those things in Azure is with something called management accounts or management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. And Tanya was talking about policy, so you can apply policies and permissions at these layers, and then you can limit, one particular group from getting into the resources from another group. How many people in here know what the Center for Internet Security is? Okay, awesome. Yeah, these guys are great, right? They just publish all kinds of best practices for almost anything you can imagine, including Azure and all the other cloud providers and your operating systems and everything else, right? And so, you want to go to the next slide? They have CIS controls for Azure that you can use. So you can take a look at those. And you want to go to the next slide?
Sorry.
These are samples of those CIS controls. So you can see here that they're pretty specific. They'll tell you this is what you need to do. And the thing that I like about the CIS benchmark is that they're testable. So instead of just having this open-ended question like, do you do this? Oh, of course we do that. Well, how do you know they do that? So I've seen audits and things where they have these kind of open-ended questions, and I'm like, how do you really know they do that? So what you can do here is, I already mentioned this, they have all the different things within your Azure account, including your Azure account itself. I guess that other slide's coming up. So you can also get hardened images. So they actually make Azure hardened images for your virtual machine. So if you're going to go spin up a virtual machine in Azure, you can actually go in, and when you create your virtual machine, you choose like a template that you want to use to build that machine. It could have Microsoft or Linux or something like that. They have actually hardened some images for you. So you can choose those. You'll pay a little bit more for those, but then you don't have to do all that work yourself. So this is a great option. And this is where I was mentioning, they're pretty specific. So in here, you can see restrict access to Azure AD administration portal to administrators only. It's pretty specific, right? And it tells you why. And then on the next slide is what I was mentioning. It actually gives you steps. You can go in and test. So if you're doing an assessment, if you're an auditor or doing an assessment, you can actually go in and test. And there are a few automated tools as well that can help you with this, to go in and measure and say yes, no, for the things that you can test in a technical way.
So my favorite part about Azure is Azure Security Center. There's a paid version and a free version. And the free version is awesome. So I made a video because I literally can go on for hours about it. But basically, it has all these amazing different parts, and I'm going to tell you about some of them. But literally, I would never stop if you allowed it. And so here are a few things. So one is the subscription coverage. So it's not necessarily on by default, because it turns out that when you turn on tons of security features by default, things might break and users get pissed off. So you can see if people are fully covered, which means paid, partially covered, which means not paid, but still awesome, and then not covered at all, and that's so it'll tell you, these subscriptions aren't covered. It'll tell you, oh, someone transferred this into the cloud. It doesn't have an agent on it, so we can't see it. And it'll tell you where it's not, so that you make sure you actually have complete coverage, which is pretty cool. And this is where you set the policies, like I was saying earlier. So I wrote a little thing about how to do custom policies. So you can write your own, or you can just choose the default policies. There's also sys benchmarks policies. There's PCI, or no, not PCI. There's Oh my gosh, because they keep
GDPR and HIPAA. And
yes, it's all of them. ISO 27001. So, and you can just like click it, and then it just has a policy for you. Does it cover it 100%? No, it does not, but it is way better than the nothing that so many, like, I don't know. It's really nice to have automated work done. Okay.
Okay, so you may have heard of Zero Trust before, and this definitely applies in the cloud. So Zero Trust, I think, started with networking. It's the idea of you don't trust your internal network. So people used to build their networks, and they used to put a firewall on the edge and say, okay, we're going to trust everything that gets past that firewall. Not a good idea anymore. So many companies have had breaches where they've been breached for a long time and didn't know it. So we no longer trust that internal network. We try to set really restrictive rules. And I actually worked for a firewall company, helped them move to the cloud. And I think it's so much easier to do this in the cloud. The networking controls in the cloud, most clouds. Our Azure definitely is really easy to set up these really fine-grained controls. And the other thing you want to know about that is that you can do the same thing with you want to think about your authentication, right? And you also can think about now the encryption, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, in the cloud. All these things, you can create really specific policies so that only the people that are supposed to access those things can get to those things. And one back. So hackers love flat networks. So one of the things I see a lot in the cloud is that people kind of forget networking. They throw networking out the window. They're like, oh, that's the old school, right? Well, I will tell you, I worked at Capital One, and some of the things that happened in that breach, I think, was partially, not completely, there's other things involved, but some of it is, not sticking with that old kind of networking design that we're used to. I'm going to show you in a minute. You want to continue to have good network design. If you turn on a virtual machine in the cloud and you look at the traffic, you will immediately see that it gets hit with about a bazillion things. Just do it. Turn it on, turn on your logs, and look. And you'll just see a million things. And you can limit your attack surface by limiting what can hit those things in the cloud. And as an example of, one of the reasons you might want to limit your attack surface is think about a new vulnerability that comes out. So this person, he's a nice guy. He said I could put him in our slides. He found a vulnerability in something called Confluence. And it's where, developers go online, they share information about their project. And he found this vulnerability and he could break in. And so he has a really kind of cool blog post out there about it. He basically figured out how to use Google and search all the sites that had this vulnerability and then attack them. So if all these companies had taken this Confluence application and run it on an internal network, it would not have been exposed to Google. It would not have been in Google results, and he would have not have found them, and they would have still had a vulnerable system, but this person would have not found them. So this is just one example of why still keeping those things off the internet can help you. So one of the things that gets attacked a lot in the cloud, RDP, SSH, and SQL. You don't want those databases exposed to the cloud. There are so many examples of breaches where people have just exposed databases straight to the internet, and that's bad, right? And there's also a lot of examples of RDP and SSH brute force. And since we've done this presentation, there's actually a new one out. If you guys saw WannaCry, there was a particular breach, WannaCry, that was caused by some code that got stolen from the NSA, which is, in the US is our people who do secret things. And there's some similar code or a different batch of code that actually breaks into RDP. And people have been looking at the number of instances of Microsoft Windows that are just exposed to the internet, and they're saying there's going to be another worm, it's going to be the next WannaCry. So all those systems exposed to the internet, you want to get them off of there. NetworkWatcher is one of the tools. I think you can find it in Security Center, but there's a lot of good networking tools in in Azure. And so, so you can go in there and you can look at the effective network rules. So how do all these rules work together, right? Because you can set a bunch of rules, but you're like, is it really open or not? Once you start getting all those, I used to do the networking for Capital One for like 10,000 developers. There was like 5 of us. It can get really kind of challenging at times. So this is a cool tool where you can go in and look and test the effective rules, like what is actually applied. And as I mentioned earlier, so people kind of forget sometimes about 3-tier networks in the cloud. They're like, oh, it's just all different, So that's why we have databases exposed to the internet, right? If you had a 3-tier network, you would not have those databases exposed to the internet. And I think that the thing was, in the past, the developers were working in a network construct where they didn't have the option to expose those databases to the internet. Now they're responsible for some of the networking, or people just don't understand the cloud networking. You still want to think about your good architecture design in the cloud. And there's one more tool under NetworkWatcher. There's a whole bunch of them, but topology will kind of show you a picture. Sometimes this is challenging in the cloud because you have all these rules and these lists of things, and you're trying to figure out what actually is there and how does it map out. This tool can help you. Azure Firewall. So this is a product or service that runs on the edge of your network. It's very expensive. I said this in our last talk with Tanya. I said, this is very expensive service. And then I left it on for a month. And with nothing in my account, it was $1,000. Yes, it's expensive. And I knew better, but I did it anyway. But you can put a lot of rules on things. One of the things in the cloud networking is that you cannot create rules on things like domain names, things like that. This tool will let you do a little bit more than some of the other networking tools, and it's really mostly on the edge. It can also protect, if you're familiar with storage accounts, it's kind of like the S3 bucket phase where everyone got their S3 buckets exposed. You can set rules on that as well and get some logging and monitoring. Another thing we want to think about in the cloud is VPNs. And some people say, we don't want a VPN anymore in the cloud. And I think sometimes people forget why we have VPNs in the first place. So back in the day, when I was first breached, I learned about network security, actually figured out I had a breach because of, looking at network traffic. I did not know what I was doing at the time. I've got blog posts on this if you want to go read it. But the VPN, in that case, they were just coming out, or I don't know how long they've been out actually, but the reason I wanted the VPN was so that I could access things on administrative ports and no one else could. And it's not because I wanted to stream videos from another country or I wanted to hide that I was pen testing someone. The real use case in the beginning was, you want to allow specific access from a specific network. If you're allowing access from anywhere, you can't create networking rules to limit that access. The other thing is it provides authentication and it encrypts your traffic. Different VPNs work different ways. An SSL VPN is not going to encrypt as much traffic as an IPsec VPN, which will encrypt everything and tunnel it all through authenticated connection. An SSL VPN is only going to encrypt the HTTPS traffic. So just understand the difference. Some people say you don't need these in the cloud. I disagree, but everyone has an opinion. So. Azure Express Route. So VPNs are one way to connect to the cloud. There's different types. There's the kind of VPN where you connect as a user, and there's the site-to-site VPNs. They also have branch VPNs if you want to connect a bunch of different sites. You can also use Azure Express Route. So Azure Express Route is a way to keep your traffic fully off the internet. So VPN will still be going over the internet. And you want to see if people have this in place when you're doing an assessment, some way of keeping their traffic safe as it traverses to their cloud. And Azure Express Route will actually be a switch in your data center, so something like that. So you can connect directly from your data center to the cloud. Another thing is a Bastion host. So a Bastion host will provide a mechanism for you to set up a host that you can use to access your other hosts in the cloud. So I actually had to set this up for Capital One. It was a really interesting project with a lot of problems along the way, so yeah. But basically, we did not want to have people just, all over the place connecting directly into their own host. We want a Bastion host. What that does is you can set permissions on that Bastion host, really lock it down so people can't install things. So you can really monitor the traffic very closely, and then you can see who is getting into the next host that they're logging into. And that's one of the things about networking and network traffic is not, when you create those networking rules, it's not just so you can block things. It's also so that once the traffic gets past a particular layer, you should see no denies in your logs. You can see when people are doing things they shouldn't be doing because you'll see denied traffic in your logs. So setting up this Bastion host will also facilitate that.
So Teri's American and I'm Canadian, and we use different language. So I call this a jump box. So in case anyone's like, wait, what? She was describing this. I'm like, do you mean a jump box? She's like, no, I mean a Bastion host.
No, it's true. I've gotten questions on phone calls. I do consulting, and they're like, what are you talking about? So good call.
So that's the real name for it. Bastion host.
Even in the U.S., they have different people call it different things. So yeah.
So one of the things that Azure does and all the clouds do is they have cloud native tools. So tools that they created that's just for their cloud and they're not going to play nice with the other clouds. So of course, Azure has a whole bunch and I'm just going to talk about a few of them. And I'm sure in the last 3 weeks since I stopped working there, they've released 25 more. Like they are constantly releasing super cool stuff. But these are some things that I really like. So the first one is adaptive application controls, which is actually waitlisting. Why'd they call it that? I don't know, because I'm not in charge. But like, basically, if you have a server, you can put a list of these things are allowed running on it and nothing else is. And it goes really nicely with the one at the bottom, file integrity monitoring. So yes?
Quick question, does that work with blacklisting as well? So if you use the policy of deny all, do you just say these are the whitelists that I will accept?
So application waitlisting is just for software. So she was talking about, can you make a blacklist as well? The problem is that if I would be like badguys.com, I would just name it badguys.com1, and then it would get past your blacklists. And bad guys are the worst. So it goes really nicely with file integrity monitoring. So the first thing, if you are malware, that you want to do is you want to stay alive and persist, right? And so then you're like, okay, I've downloaded myself to this file. Awesome. I'm going to start. And then it's like, no, you're not allowed because you're not on the approved list. Okay, that's great. I'm going to change my name to some sort of system files name. And then file integrity monitoring is like, no, you don't. So you usually do those two together. The next one is just-in-time access control. So Teri was talking about zero trust. So we no longer just assume, oh, you're in our network, therefore we love you. Turns out that hackers sometimes get in and they're not all of them are nice hackers. And so just-in-time virtual machine access means all of your ports, all 65,000 are closed 100% of the time. And then you have 2 or 3 or whatever ports you feel are appropriate set up for just-in-time. And so you flick, actually, I'll just show you. First, I'm just going to tell you about network hardening. So they just came out with this right before I left. And basically, like, there's like a bunch of buttons here, just like harden my network, Azure. And then it just goes and does what it thinks the best practices are, which is really sweet because sometimes I'm lazy, just to be clear. Okay, so I'm just going to show you just in time. So I'm not going to give a demo. Do you want to know why? Because that's scary. Also, because I don't work there and I don't get endless free Azure anymore. I tried. I was like, but I still love you. Can't I? And they're like, no, Tanya. Okay, so basically it looks like this, and it'll show you all of your boxes that you have that don't have it turned on. And then you're like, oh, I think I want to turn it on. So this is my devslop dcheck. So I have a bunch of hacker tools on there. I do not want anyone taking control of it. And it is like out on the public network or internet sometimes, because sometimes I want to do stuff with it and do demos. So I'm like, I'd better close all my ports all the time. So I request access, and it's like, how long do you want to request access for? So the maximum is 3 hours. I originally would set 1 hour because I think I'm really fast. But it turned out only I think that. If 3 hours is probably advisable to start, just saying. And then you can say, this range of IPs, but usually it defaults to just one IP. So it's like someone has to spoof my IP. They have to know that I've opened it for 3 hours. Then they have to figure out where it is. And then they also have to try to brute force my 64-bit random character password. So I would live stream and just open this up and people are like, don't you feel afraid? I'm like, no. Me and my 18 watchers, viewers are not going to, also, obviously all my viewers are nice. But anyway, so nothing bad has happened and it's great. And then, yes, the 3 hours thing. Adaptive application controls, it looks like this. But the more exciting thing is advanced threat protection. So this is one of those paid feature things. But when you flip it on, it can protect containers and it can protect VMs, databases. And what it will do is it'll say, that looks bad, and then it'll actually block what looks like to be attacks. It is different for your storage containers than it is for your databases, but both are good for different reasons. And from here, so this is like the view in Azure Security Center, you can set up something called a playbook. I forget if we have a slide on this, so I'm just going to tell you about it now. But a playbook is basically a serverless app. So when the alerts trigger in here, it calls your serverless app through the playbook. And then you can just have it do whatever you want. So you could have it email Teri in the middle of the night. Just kidding, don't do that. But you could have it like black hole an IP. You could have it turn off the server. There's a million things that you can have it do, and you can write your own, which I think is pretty cool. And then here are a bunch of amazing alerts that I got when I opened some stuff up. I used to have this friend, well, we're still friends, on the team named Damo, but he had this server. And when I started on the team at Microsoft, it was just a demo server, and he accidentally put it outside of all the firewalls and all the networks. And I'm like searching around. I'm like, Damo, do you know that there's this hacker that keeps trying to brute force, like in slow motion, this virtual machine? And for 4 months, this person, like every few days, would come back. I'm like, this is like the world's crappiest hacker, but so patient, like so dedicated. I'm like, Damo, your friend is back, and I would like send him little updates. It made for awesome demos. But anyway. So again, the threat protection is also for your storage. So like Teri was saying with the S3 buckets, like all of the cloud providers have learned that obviously we don't want anyone's personal data to be on the internet unless they intend it to be. So there's all these defaults now on all the clouds, not just Azure, of like just locked down by default. But you can also add protection and detection and all sorts of stuff, all the things. That is where your crown jewels are. And all of us want them to stay there.
Okay, so the Azure WAF. So when you're talking about a WAF, or a web application firewall, you're talking about a layer in the network up at layer 7, if you're familiar with the OSI model. This is the, where it's going to try to protect the full web request as opposed to those network packets at the lower layers with those other things we were talking about. So it's going to look at the full web request, and it's going to look for things that it perceives to be usually application attacks. So SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all the OWASP top 10 type of, here you go, OWASP top 10. On Azure, they do have a set of rules which are for the OWASP top 10. So they're going to try to find those things going on and hitting your applications and block them. Also in NetworkWatcher, I like NetworkWatcher because I like networking and has a lot of stuff in there. You can get network flow logs, which are, if you're familiar with Cisco flow logs at all, it's similar. You're going to get information about the packets going back and forth. And you can also get some traffic analysis. So they have a dashboard that will kind of give you some traffic analysis on those flow logs. The other thing I think is cool, so I actually wrote a paper on packet capture on AWS because someone, I don't know if you guys know SANS Institute, but someone there told me like it's not possible to do that, and I was like, yes, it is. So I wrote a paper on it. I have a SANS master's degree. That's part of why I have the GSE, and you could not at the time do this on AWS. And it's really a proof of concept, not like for production use, but just to show you could do it. And Azure was actually the first cloud to come out with a way to do this. It's not inline, but you can actually capture packets and analyze them. So if you're doing an assessment on a company, maybe you want to see if they're looking, have a way to get in there and look at packets if there's an incident. Another thing you can look at are there's so many logs in the cloud. Make sure you know where they all are. I think this is challenging because there's so many different services and there's a lot of different network monitoring and logging that you can go look at. You could see if they have an IDS, IPS, DLP. All the clouds have DLP services, DNS logging, firewalls, WAFs, load balancers, CDNs. All those things have logs. A lot of times when I do an assessment, I'll see, well, they don't have these logs turned on. They're obviously not looking at them, and those logs can provide clues if you have an incident.
Teri, what's IPS and IDS?
IPS and IDS. Does anyone here know what that is?
I bet a bunch of them do, but
okay,
since
not
this
everybody,
isn't a networking
So one of the things about the cloud is that just by default, you couldn't see the packet layer. So you couldn't see down in the packets. I showed you that picture with the packets where you can go down into the really detailed network layers. And an IDS and IPS, or an intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system, will look at those packets as they're going over the network and try to find attacks. And one of the good things about looking for attacks in your network is that if someone gets malware on a host, and I've seen this happen, they can delete the logs, they can turn off the security services, everything else. But if you're capturing network traffic and you're looking at that, the malware on that host cannot affect your network traffic, your network logs, and turn it off. So you can find some things there are some types of attacks you can't see at the higher layers in the stack. And also there's things that, they can't turn off if they get on a host. So that's what it is.
Thanks, Teri.
No problem, Tanya.
So talking about seeing attacks, so Azure made their own SIM. It's the first cloud-native SIM. I'm sure it won't be the last. But because they're so experienced with their own cloud and how all of the things look, they just made their own tool. So it can suck up all of the logs from your other cloud, from your apps, from everything, and then it gives you kind of a viewpoint of where to see everything. The last time I looked at it, it was still in preview, and
It's GA.
it's GA, yeah.
GA last month. No, it's November now. Well, end of September.
So it's really good to have your Microsoft friends in the front row. Thank you. No, I mean that. Okay, so other cool things. So advanced data security. So monitoring your database is good. All of that is good. But when I did a lot of incident response, a thing that would kind of upset me is if I didn't know the classification of the data that I was doing it. So I did a lot of incident response for the government, and their classifications are like public or top secret, secret, et cetera, and then there's actually like a crap ton of things above top secret that I'd better not be coming up on anything like this. But the point is, when I would see, oh, that's public, I'm like, oh, I can just chill out a bit now. Like, I don't need to set my hair on fire. Everything's going to be okay because all of the data in this thing is public. Or, oh, it's like, this level, this level, this level. It helps you like set some expectations. And also, is it personal information? Is it health information? So you can label all of these things, which is awesome. You can also set it to like auto VA scan itself. So I did that, and then I would not fix any of the things, so it would make good demos. Yes, that's why I didn't fix the things. And anyway, having it VA or vulnerability assess scan itself, like scan, not a full VA, it's so nice. So you can just turn this on and then just like fix what it says. Don't do what Tanya did on her demos. Actually fix the stuff. Yes. Okay. Oh, yes, so I just told you all of this. But here's a short link with slightly more information, so that's good. Okay, so up next we have Teri.
Okay, so encryption. I heard a talk earlier today talking about encryption. You want to make sure you protect your keys. Obviously, you want to follow best practices in terms of encryption, not let those get stolen. Make sure you're doing your key rotation, right? Because the longer your keys hang around, the greater chance someone has to brute force those keys. And also use correct algorithms and modes if you're not sure what to use there. There's something in the US called NIST that has, a document with recommendations, and I'm sure they have the same thing in Australia and other countries where they basically tell you, here's what the government's using, what the government recommends, and you can go with that if you're not sure. The good thing is a lot of the cloud providers will take care of some of this for you if you use their services. And some of those are like Key Vault on Azure. If you guys are familiar with the HSM, if you're not, don't worry about it right now. But you want to make sure that those encryption keys are handled correctly. And if you go into Azure Security Center, you can find, what is encrypted and unencrypted. So if you have policies that say, hey, everything, all our virtual machines should be encrypted, all our disks should be encrypted, or all these files in our storage account should be encrypted, you can find this information here. So it's a good thing to look at.
So this is my favorite part of Azure Security Center, which is their recommendations. It does VA scans and analysis of the network and everything that you've built within your subscription. And if you have the master subscription and there's all these other ones underneath, you can see everything. And it basically creates a prioritized list of what to fix first, like what is the biggest bang for your buck. And basically, like, you can just turn this on, and this is part of the free mode. So you'll get most of these if you have it set up on the free, not all of them, but most. Just like knock them out and look awesome. It'll change your security score. So see at the top left, see it says like 561 resources and blah, blah, blah. So it gives you a score of things like, so it can go better and better. So you can say to your boss, like, yeah, like I took out the top 5 of the things that we're worried about. And next month I'm going to do the other 5 or whatever, right? It's really cool that it does this, and it's because they want you to have a good experience and just keeping their customer and keeping in business. If they make sure you are secure, it's good for everyone. So I have a ton of videos of me talking about this, so we didn't want to take too much time on it. But if you look up my name and Azure, you'll see my love of Azure Security Center. Okay, so with that, we're at the checklist. So these are the 2 most important slides. Please take a photo if they're the only ones. Okay.
You want to start?
Okay.
All right, so set your scope. Only test what is in scope, especially if you're doing this for a third-party client. If you go out of scope, you can get in trouble. You don't want to get in trouble.
Don't get in trouble. So verify the account structure, the identity, the access control. Make sure that they are following best practices.
Set your Azure policies according to your organization's need. This is all about governance, right? Making sure people are doing the right things. And you can set up those automated policies to help you make sure keep things in check. And this is really good for security because a lot of the mistakes, the human mistakes are what lead to security problems.
So I'm super biased, but turn on Azure Security Center. Come on. For all your subscriptions, like at least at just the free level, you're already paying for it. So just turn it on. Yeah.
Use cloud-native security features. These are great. They're built in. You can also use third-party tools, but if you're not sure or you're just getting started, hey, turn these on. They're there. You don't have to open new network ports to use them. You don't have to do anything special. You just go in there and turn them on, and you can start using them right away.
Perfect. So follow networking best practices. Just because you're in the cloud, that does not mean it went away. So network security groups. So router, routes, depending upon if you ask the Canadian or the American. Access.
I was told if you say it the wrong way in Australia, it's not good.
Oh.
It's not.
Oh.
Don't say route in here.
Route.
I was told that last time I was here.
Okay, so awesome. So firewalls, Express Route, and Bastion Host as our jump boxes.
Be on top of your alerts and logs. Definitely, if you turn logs on and you don't look at them, they don't help you, right? Well, they may help you after the fact when it's too late, but if you're looking at them up front, you can find out if you have bad people in your network.
Yes. Scan all that can be scanned. And especially if you use SQL databases, since they invented those, you should definitely use it for on there. Yes, that's awesome. Very smooth, Tanya.
I threw you off with the root thing. Okay. Encryption for all your disks and data in transit and at rest. One of the things we did at Capital One, and you're going to hear more about that later, but they have a lot of good policies there and good rules. And one of the things they said was we're just going to encrypt everything, right? And so it's really a lot easier to do in the cloud. It doesn't cost that much more. Some cases, the cloud providers do it for you by default. So yeah, definitely make sure everything's encrypted.
Monitor all that can be monitored.
And Tanya's favorite, follow the Azure Security Center recommendations because Tanya will love you.
It's true. No, but they're just so good.
They will help you.
It's how
right?
a lot of how I learned cloud security was through those. I'm like, this is such a great idea. And so the last thing is once you've done all this, then call your pen tester. Your pen tester will think you're awesome, and you will actually get all your money's worth out of them because you already have a really decent security posture. And so, let's do a little. So what did we learn today? We learned you can do it yourself. You really can. And here are some articles and videos that are by us about what we talked about today and when we did this assessment and the live stream and all the things. And with that, we want to say thank you.
Questions? Quite a few. I'll bring it back.
Oh.
Sorry, who was
You
it?
answer all the questions.
Oh no! If I have the mic, do I have to answer all the questions? No, it was just...
Hi there. That was a really great talk. Thank you very much. I'm fundamentally pretty lazy. In AWS, we've had a lot of luck with Prowler and Scout Suite to do kind of the same thing. Do you think the coverage for the security center is good enough that you don't need a third-party tool like that for this sort of work?
I feel that I would be in conflict of interest to answer that, honestly, because it's hard for me to not be biased because I know that team so well. So I think they're amazing and it's the best ever.
I do have to admit, I like AWS and I like Azure. I think Azure Security Center is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It has a lot of information in there. When you run Prowler, I really like Prowler. I think some of the open source tools for some of the other clouds aren't as good. I also know the guy that writes Prowler, so I'm biased there. But I think Azure Security Center, I've got that CIS benchmarks right in there for you. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah. Because me telling you it's the best is not, I don't know, you know what I mean? Are there more questions? So just say it and I'll repeat it.
Yell it out and you can repeat.
Kind of a long question.
Okay.
All right, that's right. I'll get the mic.
Is it a story? And is there a funny ending? Because we only allow stories with funny endings.
You could probably make a funny ending out of it, because what I want to ask is, like, if, say, I'm looking for a cloud provider and I want, say, a comparison, AWS versus Azure, and yeah, I'm sure you can do something funny with this, but look, ideally we want security by default, right?
Yeah.
But we can't always have that. If we can't have that, then the next best thing is make it easy for me to find the problems, like the recommendations, the Azure security recommendations. And I don't know if there's something similar in AWS. But I know maybe contractually it's my responsibility to do everything, but if I have to read 200 pages of documents to know to turn this thing on, that is not good security to me. So who's going to help me more to make it easy by default, or secure, make it easy for me to make it secure? Say Azure or Microsoft. So go crazy with that.
Okay, so
That is a long question.
Yeah, we both have opinions. So obviously Azure. So Microsoft released this thing called Microsoft Learn, and it's just like this full tons of training and everything is free. They're trying to make, basically, like, they make one of everything in regards to security. They, like, you don't have to bring any other tools at this point. And, like, they're just, like, so all over it. Security is a very, very serious priority there. They're very, very intense about it. It's really awesome. I've had Azure tell on me to my boss, like, numerous times. I'm not kidding. So, although I'm very biased, my experience with AWS is limited.
I just have an opinion on this because I'll tell you a story. When the first S3 bucket breach came out, I was writing security articles as a researcher for the company I work for, and they ran up to me and said, "You have to write how the cloud is not secure." And I'm like, no. That's the customer's responsibility. And if you're going to move to the cloud, you have certain responsibilities. You can't blame the cloud provider. There's a line, there's a contract, and there's something called the shared responsibility model in every cloud. Azure has one too.
Yes.
And you have certain responsibilities. So if you want to use that, you just have to take the responsibility to go out and read and understand and learn those things just as you would on premises. I think the difference was it's something new. And when you're on premises, people are working within the confines of an existing network architecture, and there's existing IT governance and structure in place. And then people just go to the cloud and they're like, woo, developers gone wild. Like, we can do whatever we want now. And they're like, why are we having so many problems? Right? And one of the things I say is, well, would you let a developer or a business person operate on you? No. Why not? Because they're not trained to be a doctor. So if you're going to let your developers have all this, or whoever it is, go to the cloud and use all these tools, they need to have the proper training to do things securely. And I also have this saying, if you guys are familiar with the term RTFM, I say RTCM, read the cloud manual. It's not an option. I mean, if you want to go use a service, you have to understand the security controls for that service and how to secure it. And Azure Security Center will help you a lot. But you still have a certain level of responsibility, and the cloud provider gives you that responsibility and that option, in part because they don't want to look at your data, right?
Yeah, they're, no.
And so you have responsibility to protect that data, because they're not going to get into your data and say, oh, this is not secure. That's part of the deal. Like, they're going to let you have control of your data, and they're supposed to not look at it. The big cloud providers definitely don't. And so you have to do it.
Yeah, you have to. I spoke somewhere, like Microsoft doing the tour, and I was in Asia, and this guy was like, well, infrastructure as a service, I don't have to patch anything ever again. And I said, you mean platform as a service? So if you get like an app service, you plop an app on it. Yeah, he's like, no, infrastructure as a service. Like, give me a Linux box, give me a Windows box. And I was like, oh my God, you need to go back right now and start patching. And I hadn't patched in like 7 months. And so if you have to patch on-prem, you have to patch in Azure too, and in AWS, and we just want you to have good experiences. So if you aren't sure, maybe call in someone like Teri to come in, and she has a class next week. Sorry. In two weeks.
Last question.
Okay, last
question. Going once, going twice.
We will be here the rest of the day.
I still have got the stickers.
Oh, in the back.
There is.
Loudly.
Do yell out. You need the mic now. I just got the mic. Right.
So there used to be version 1 of Azure, and we are they.
I can repeat my question. It's
Okay,
is there anything particular to these old Azure services like cloud service, that kind of thing?
Are there any particular services
Like
of Azure cloud services?
security measurement or these things came specifically to cloud services?
Do you mean cloud native?
Azure cloud service.
So are there security products within Azure, like cloud native security
Any
products?
controls measurement of these areas or...
I feel like I don't know how to answer that because we just did for an hour. I'm really confused. I'm sorry. I must be having trouble.
Do you mean the old version of App Service, the cloud service, like the really, really old version?
Oh, the really, really old version.
Yes,
No.
those ones.
No, we're just ashamed. Just kidding. I have no idea. For real, don't use that.
Thank you.
No, like there used to
So,
be a really old
I think that's
version,
it.
the
Thank you for your
original
time.
version of Azure, and
So-
that's no.
Sorry, do you want to finish the answer or you good?
No, just
perfect.
upgrade. Use the real new Azure, the real one.
Use
It's
the
not-
real Azure.
Yeah, use the real Azure, please.
There's only multiple. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.